What happens if you don't hook up in a culture where hooking up organizes social life? Welcome back to the Your Love Class Book Club. I'm Professor S, and we're reading American Hookup, using research to unpack dating so you can decide what actually fits for you. Chapter 4 is called Opting Out, and it asks a question that feels simple. What happens to students who don't participate in hookup culture? While we discuss, we will also be building a specific skill, the skill of noticing how identity and belonging can shape romantic choices. Chapter 4, Opting Out, isn't really about abstinence. It's about what happens socially when someone steps outside a dominant script. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to see how opting out of hookup culture isn't just a personal decision, it can also be a positional one. So up until this point, we've looked at scripts around hookup culture and environments, but now we shift our attention to identity, inequality, and belonging. We look at students who abstain either intentionally or because they feel unwelcome or uninterested in the spaces that exist on their campuses. Wade also looks at how opting out can impact students socially. For example, imagine it's Friday night, or maybe Wednesday if you're in Gainesville. Your friends are getting ready to go out, there's momentum and energy in the room, and you decide you're not going. It's not because you're anti-sex or judging anyone, you just don't feel like participating. Maybe you don't want to explain why you aren't drinking that night or looking for a hookup. Going to places where the cultural scripts are normalized and either run directly against your own scripts or don't include spaces for you can be really challenging. Maybe you decide to stay in and FaceTime with your romantic partner or a friend. Either way, the next day there's going to be shared memories, discussions, and you won't be a part of that. And that's where Wade takes us, that feeling of isolation. She introduces students who abstained from hookup culture for really different reasons. Some, like Emery, identified as a romantic who wasn't interested in casual sex. Or students like Rosalind, who purposefully avoided high-risk situations, like parties and bars. Others, like Ren, found social spaces super hetero and unwelcoming for her. These students weren't outright opting out of sex or relationships, but they were opting out of pursuing them through hookup culture. However, Wade quickly complicates the idea that opting out is a purely personal choice, and she reminds us that just like in other spaces, campuses can have a hierarchy of desirability. And it is certainly a hierarchy that her students described in their journals and in her research. Desirability is structured. It can be shaped by many things, including race, gender, class, religion, and queerness. For example, Black men are often hypersexualized, Asian men are frequently desexualized, and Black and Latina women describe being read through racialized sexual scripts. These patterns aren't new, they're rooted in historical narratives about race and sexuality in the United States. If you're interested in digging deeper into that intersection, Patricia Hill Collins' Black Feminist Thought or Bell Hooks' Ain't I a Woman offer important context, and I will link them below. Now here, let's pause for a moment, because before you decide whether you agree with Wade, I want you to ask yourself, who on your campus is seen as naturally desirable? And who isn't even a part of the conversation? This question alone changes how you read this chapter, and I hope you think about it. Wade's key point is that opting out isn't always just about values or preferences. Sometimes it's also about positioning. Jazzaline, for example, chose not to hook up because of her faith. But what she struggled with most wasn't her own desire, it was belonging. She was worried she was missing, in her words, the whole college experience. And that phrase really matters because it shows that hookup culture had become symbolic of college life itself. And she was not the only student who wrote about that. And when we realize that social bonding can center on parties and hookups, students who abstain can be quietly moved towards the margins. Scripts or social norms can feel universal when really they're just dominant. And when something feels dominant, it can hide how diverse people's experiences actually are. So there may be more social spaces today for students who opt out of the dominant dating script. Clubs, friend networks, online communities, identity-based groups, but even those spaces have norms. They also shape belonging, identity, and access in their own ways. So the question isn't simply, is hookup culture good or bad? It's how do different spaces and identities impact belonging? At the end of the chapter, Wade zooms out and reminds us that campuses are so much larger than hookup culture makes them appear, and a significant portion of students are not regularly hooking up. But because hookup culture is loud and highly visible, it can feel universal, like it is the college experience itself. But let's remember, visibility is not universality, and that distinction matters because when something feels universal, it can also start to feel inevitable. And when things feel inevitable, we sometimes stop examining them. Wade's work highlights here that we do need to continue examining them, and that not everyone moves through dating culture with the same ease, safety, or risk. Racism, classism, and homophobia can shape who feels visible, desirable, or at risk. Religious commitments can shape that experience too, sometimes not through discrimination, but through tension between personal values and dominant campus norms. When we assume everyone is navigating the same exact landscape, it's easy to internalize confusion or exclusion as something being wrong with you individually. But when you see how identity and structure influence dating culture, something shifts. It becomes less about a personal deficiency or something with your identity and more about context. And I think that clarity can be really deeply empowering, and I hope it is for y'all. That's why the skill we're building this week is noticing how belonging works. Because once you can see the structure, you can decide more intentionally how you want to be a part of that structure or that culture. So here's your skill for this week. Notice where belonging happens in your world. Where do people actually connect? Who sets the norms in those spaces? And what shifts socially when someone steps outside of the dominant script? You don't need to judge it, but just observe it. Next chapter, we'll look at how inequality becomes even more explicit in shaping participation. And remember, love isn't just luck, it's a skill, and skills are something we can practice.